Theocracy was long ago abandoned in the West for democracy. Perhaps nothing else illustrates our plight or the source of it than this ill-advised step. In just about any other setting, the mob would not be given a voice. We never think a majority has anything wise to say about the nature of truth. The majority is not in charge of philosophy, and public opinion is not the main influencer in epistemology or science. Indeed, we often hear that truth is not a popularity sport, and popularity does not prove a course of action is right. No one earns a paycheck, so the spending of it will be decided by ballot. Indeed, for the most part, we dislike people interfering in our decisions, especially when they are strangers with nothing invested in the outcome. The modern interpretation of democracy is universality. Every adult has a right to vote. It was not always so. People had to earn the right to cast a ballot. The vote was often by a show of hands. People could see who was advocating for what. But because politics was such a raucous event, women were naturally excluded. As the democratic process was made more genteel, women decided they could handle the process of marking a ballot. Eventually, democracy came to mean universal suffrage of all adult persons within a given jurisdiction. Democracy is touted as manifesting the power of the people. Naturally, it is the people who vote. But in what other capacity or situation is the decision-making power given to the general public? Democracy is often considered the opposite of autocracy, but the mechanism in operation is the same in both. The levers of power are more concentrated in autocracy, but the authority of the ruler is still based on the authority of the most active group. The way the power of the ruling clique is expressed is different in an autocracy, but the ruling group still overpower the subordinate group in a democracy. In a democracy, the power of the people is thought to be expressed in the numerical superiority of the party in power and their supporters. In fact, it is their energy in campaigning for their party and their willingness to show up to vote that determines the outcome of the election. If an autocrat could not instill in others this same level of loyalty and service, he would not stay in power for long. Conventional wisdom tells us that an autocracy retains power because he has control of the armed forces. Take away the military and democracy would not last either. But without socialism being an option, the justification for democracy fails. Only if no one owns anything but we have a right to everything is democracy possible. But socialism is justified in only two scenarios. Either no one made anything and has no claim to anything, or we all have an equal claim to everything. Either no one created anything, and no one owns anything, or we all contributed to everything equally. If neither of these cases is true, socialism is evil, and democracy cannot be validated. But of course, whatever the truth is, it is not either of these two alternatives. Some of us do contribute more than others, and others actually end up with a negative balance. Socialism cannot be morally justified, and democracy is therefore impossible to sanctify. There's only one possible response a Christian can make to socialism. Humans can take only one of two roads, and they are mutually exclusive. We must understand this division because it is basic to reality. We either live right as conservatives or dependent on values and standards we create ad hoc in response to our feelings of the moment. The less we trust in Jesus, the more we are left to rely on our own abilities. No one trusts anyone to any degree unless required to by God. Secularists become selfish and fearful, devoid of faith in Christ. It is at the point where we need to trust others that so many Christians become lost. Christians are little better than secularists in this regard. Most do not trust anyone else. The immature Christian believes in Christ but not in his church. Or they say they believe in his church but not those who compose it. Christians fail to understand that in Christ there is no distinction between Christ and his church or between the church and Christianity. The church is the embodiment of Christ on earth. Not because the church is God, but because we need something built on a human scale to interact with. Jesus cannot be expected to remain human for our benefit. He has a right and even duty to return to his God form. We are reborn into faith, into a new creature. Individually we are still sinners in flesh. It is in our identity as the church that we are born into faith. It is as the church we are perfected. This perfectibility cannot happen if we reject the church. We are not rejecting other Christians when we fail to build the church, we are rejecting our new perfected identity. Faith in Jesus is not about Jesus, it is about the church. It is not difficult to believe in God or Jesus. That is not the problem. The problem is believing in ourselves. We cannot see us as perfected beings. We are blind to the identity we are given when reborn in spirit. Thus, this identity cannot trust the perfected identities of other Christians. We are blind to our own spiritual nature and to the spiritual nature of the church. People, at least in the West, universally condemn slavery. At times it seems as if some think slavery is worse than rape or murder. But slavery has always existed, and it exists everywhere. Changing the name does not alter the reality. There is only one question we need answering. Who is the slave, the good person or those who are evil? Because ultimately one will serve the other. In the old days when nations went to war, the loser was killed or enslaved. There was no reset button and things did not go back to normal after a war. If a nation wanted freedom from their oppressor, they fought for it. Those who lost were slaves to those who won. War happens less frequently and the repercussions of losing a war are less serious. The more pressing issue now is the informal war against the right. In the liberal justice system, the good become the slaves to evil. Not only must those who are good obey the law, a law the unjust often contravene without repercussions. It is the good who are compelled to pay the costs of justice, if we get it. Evil lords it over the merciful. Evil takes advantage of tolerance, to make inroads into decency while demanding more tolerance in the name of tolerance. It's a no-win contest because the end is the death of tolerance at the hands of the intolerant. If we only ensured each person was paid for what they do, nothing would be available to maintain freeloaders. Conservatism is possible only under a theocracy because theocracy is incompatible with liberalism. Theocracy begins with God, not with man. If God exists, then perfection exists. If perfection is attached to the church, then a utopia is not only possible but natural. Theocracy is the perfect government of a perfect organization called apologia, which is a theocratic utopia.